The yeas are 60, the nays are 39. H.R. 3590 as amended, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is passed. The gallery would refrain from...
So the vote. Table.
Without objection. Okay. The clerk will report H.R. 4314.
So they move on now to procedural issues, but the bill has passed. You heard it there, 60-39, a historic vote in the United States Senate, the first vote in 114 years. The United States Senate has passed landmark legislation, health care reform. This now means the bill heads into conference negotiations with the House of Representatives, which passed their competing health care reform bill a month ago. Let's go back to NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, your thoughts?
Well, this really is an important moment because it really brings to a head all of the work that has gone on intensely for the last few weeks, certainly over months, and Democrats would say for decades that they've been able to get to this point. Democrats tell us that in a room off the Senate floor known as the cloakroom, each party has one where senators are able to spend a little time before they're in public view on the Senate floor. Democrats say they have a photo of the late Senator Edward Kennedy with a quote there, words of his, "Let's get it done." And at every critical turn here, we have seen Democrats referencing, invoking Senator Kennedy. Of course, he called it the cause of his life to try to bring a much broader access to health insurance. And for senators who, of course, considered him a close colleague and personal friend, his absence has been particularly noted throughout. Even Republicans as well have noted his absence and have said things might have been a little less partisan, a little less tense had Edward Kennedy lived to see this day. His wife, Victoria, his widow now, she was here the other night when the first of those key votes was taken at 1 o'clock in the morning to lend her support, and perhaps is even here again this morning. I've not seen her yet, but she has been a presence throughout this process. As you mentioned, it now goes to conference. So what does that mean? Each body, the Senate and House, will nominate a team that will handle the negotiations for their side, and they will work closely with the White House to go through these two gigantic pieces of legislation. Much of it's really compatible, but there are key areas where there are differences, and they'll put together one piece of health care reform as Democrats see it, authored primarily by Democrats with some Republican ideas. Republicans would tell you certainly not enough Republican ideas. That'll all get going in the new year, and we now know from the White House that they expect that they probably won't have a final passage when the president comes here to speak to Congress for the State of the Union, that annual event, usually at the end of January, beginning of February. David?
Kelly, I want to ask you about some of the personal relationships because we've seen some remarkable scenes here on the Senate floor. There was Minnesota Senator Al Franken. He essentially gave a pat on the back to Senator Lieberman. Senator Stabenow, a big hug to Senator Sanders. There were some senators like Senator Harkin who essentially bolted from the floor, presumably to try and catch a flight to head back to Iowa for Christmas. Talk about the interpersonal relationships between some of these senators there. For example, Senator McCaskill giving a big hug to, I believe that's Senator Landrieu and Green. But in any case, talk about I suppose the sort of the personal connections, particularly on the Democratic side, that caucus is feeling.
Interesting that you would point that out, and since we have a bit of time here this morning, I think those are some stories our viewers don't hear often enough. When you reference Al Franken giving a pat on the back to Joe Lieberman, that springs to mind the very tense moment earlier in this process when Joe Lieberman was trying to finish a point, asked for a little bit more time after his time had expired, and it was Al Franken, one of the newest members of the Senate, Democrat of Minnesota, stopped him, cut him short. Now, Franken said he was following the rules given.
I'm cut you off right there because there's a moment at the bottom of the screen. You can see Al Franken talking with Pat Roberts of Kansas, Senator Roberts, who voted against it, in a very sort of chummy pat on the back, congratulations.
Right, and what we're seeing now is that Al Franken, for example, said that yesterday he felt bad about some of the tense moments that had occurred on the Senate floor, including his own. And from that, we can infer he was talking about that testy moment with Joe Lieberman, another one earlier in this process where he really shouted at John Thune, who's a Republican of South Dakota. So in terms of just talking about Al Franken, you get that sense that now people are trying to bring back together what they call the comedy of the Senate, which is a a spirit of being able to work together. Lots of hours spent together, lots of close relationships. When you talked about Senator Tom Harkin dashing out, I've talked to a number of senators about can they make it home given the flight schedule. And there are those who live in the Mountain West, for example, who are concerned about just not being able to make it. Those who live much closer, who have home states that are nearby, believe they will make it. It's been one of the issues because, of course, the families of senators have been watching this closely and have been weighing in at home, hoping they can get back in time. So there is a certain fury about this morning. The Senate leadership will stick around for a bit after this vote for a press conference, but I was again warned by staff it's going to be quick because they want to get out the door and try to get home to their families and get to their home states. Some have just given up on it. Patrick Leahy, who is from Vermont, not so far away, had a Christmas tree shipped here from Vermont, so he and his wife and family will simply celebrate in their home in the Washington, D.C. area instead of going back to Vermont. So what we're seeing today is really the end of what has been a very tense and an exhausting process for senators. We talk about how unusual this is. Today is the 25th straight day they have been in session, going right through weekends and so forth. That is extraordinarily unusual for the Senate. For people who are working, everyday jobs in America, maybe not so unusual. Here, that's remarkable. And it is second in history. There was only one time when they went longer, and that was in 1917, leading up to the U.S. entering World War I. So it gives you a sense of what connects history here, of how rare this kind of thing is. So we're seeing a little bit more of the good spirit of the Senate, probably a lot of exchange of holiday wishes as well. They will not see each other again until January 19th when they come back and begin a new session. They'll be going home. Those who are running for election will have a lot of work to do to try to be visible in their home states. David?
Andy, Kelly, underscore your point. Senator Susan Collins there, the bottom left of the screen, talking to Senator Carl Levin. Senator Carl Levin, of course, from Michigan, voted in the affirmative. Senator Collins voted against it, but we've seen Senator Collins congratulate several of her Democratic colleagues on passing this. And of course, it's important to remember that it's not pure passion and fighting among all senators. In fact, among most senators, there is this sense of collegiality. They fight hard, but they do remain some very strong personal relationships because of all the other legislation that they continue to work on together.